financial breakthrough, divine favor, and abundant blessings. Many have been taught that giving 10% of their income guarantees them wealth, security, and supernatural provision. But what if I told you there's a deeper truth that your church never tells you?
Many have been taught that
A
giving
truth that can
10%
set
of
you
their
free from
income
financial manipulation and help you understand the real power of giving. Tithing was never meant to be a religious burden, but a principle of honor, stewardship, and faith. The problem is that many have turned it into a tool of fear, telling you that if you don't tithe, you will be cursed. Your finances will dry up, and God will withhold his blessings. But does God really operate on a transactional system where he only blesses those who give a fixed percentage? Or is his blessing rooted in something far greater? The true purpose of tithing was never about money. It was about trust. It was about putting God first. Not because you're afraid of losing something, but because you recognize that everything you have comes from him. But let's be real. Many churches have twisted this truth. They preach tithing as a requirement for prosperity while ignoring the deeper principle behind it: generosity, integrity, and a heart that gives cheerfully, not under compulsion. God is not a slot machine where you put in 10% and expect a jackpot. He is a loving Father who desires that you give out of revelation, not obligation. If you give simply because you are afraid of curses, you are not walking in faith, you are walking in fear. And fear-based giving is not what God ever intended. Some of the wealthiest people on earth have never tithed a dime. Yet they prosper because they understand the power of giving, sowing, and managing resources wisely. The truth is, it's not just about giving to a church. It's about being a blessing wherever you go. It's about using your resources to help the needy, support your family, and invest in things that truly make a difference. What the church often fails to teach is that financial increase is not just about giving, it's about wisdom. It's about how you manage what you have, how you invest, how you work, and how you steward the opportunities God gives you. Many people tithe faithfully, yet remain broke because they have never been taught how to handle money wisely. God's plan is not for you to be manipulated into giving, but for you to understand the deeper principle of stewardship. Yes, give, but give with wisdom. Give where there is impact. Give where lives are being changed. Give not because you are trying to buy God's blessing, but because you understand that you are already blessed. The truth about tithing is this: it is not a magic formula. It is not a guarantee of wealth. It is not a requirement for God's love. It is a principle of faith, but it must be combined with wisdom, discipline, and a heart that truly seeks to honor God, not just a religious obligation. Don't be deceived into thinking that money alone moves God. It is faith, integrity, and purpose-driven generosity that unlock doors. Let go of fear-based giving. Embrace the freedom of true generosity and walk in the abundant wisdom that leads to lasting prosperity. Tithing was never meant to be a burden, yet for many people it has become exactly that. What was originally designed as a principle of honor and trust has been distorted into a religious obligation that weighs heavily on the hearts and finances of believers. It was never intended to be a rigid rule that forces people into financial stress. Yet countless individuals have been made to feel guilty, fearful, and even ashamed if they are unable to meet the 10% requirement. The pressure to give, not out of joy, but out of fear, has turned what should be an act of faith into a source of anxiety. From the very beginning, tithing was about recognizing God as the source of all provision. It was never about a legalistic demand, but about cultivating a heart of gratitude and dependence on Him. In the Old Testament, tithing was instituted as a way to support the Levites, the priests who served in the temple, as well as the poor, widows, and orphans. It was not simply about giving money to a religious institution. It was about sustaining the community and ensuring that everyone's needs were met. It was about fairness, generosity, and obedience to a higher purpose. However, over time, the spirit behind tithing has been lost, replaced by a transactional mindset where people are told that if they do not give exactly 10%, they are robbing God and inviting financial struggles into their lives. Many churches today emphasize tithing as the key to unlocking God's blessings, making it seem as though financial prosperity is directly tied to how much one gives. This teaching has led many to believe that if they tithe, they will automatically become wealthy, and if they don't, they will suffer. This is not only an incomplete message, but it also misrepresents the true nature of God. God does not operate on a pay-to-bless system. His love, favor, and provision are not for sale. If blessings were simply a result of tithing, then every tither would be rich and every non-tither would be poor, but this is clearly not the case. Some of the wealthiest people in the world have never tithed a day in their lives, yet they continue to prosper because they understand financial principles that go beyond giving. They understand how to create, manage, and invest wealth. On the other hand, many faithful tithers struggle financially, not because they lack faith, but because they lack financial literacy and wisdom. They are being taught that giving alone is enough without being given the tools to steward their finances effectively. This is where the message of tithing has failed so many people. It has been presented as a shortcut to wealth rather than as one piece of a much bigger puzzle. God never intended tithing to be a burden that forces people to choose between paying their bills and giving to the church. He never wanted people to feel obligated to give when they are struggling just to survive. The true principle behind tithing is that of trust and priority. It is not about a strict percentage. It is about the heart behind the giving. When people give out of a genuine desire to honor God and bless others, their giving carries power. But when they give out of fear, guilt, or obligation, it becomes nothing more than a religious ritual with no true meaning. The idea that God is angry with those who do not tithe is a misunderstanding of His nature. He is not a tyrant demanding a tax from His children. He is a loving Father who desires that they live in freedom and wisdom. If tithing was meant to be a blessing, then it cannot be something that brings anxiety, pressure, or fear. True giving should bring joy, not stress. It should be a response to God's goodness, not an attempt to buy His favor. For too long, people have been led to believe that tithing is the only way to show financial faithfulness to God. But this is not true. There are many ways to honor God with finances: helping the poor, supporting missions, investing in community projects, and being generous in everyday life. A person who gives generously to those in need but does not formally tithe to a church is not less faithful than one who tithes regularly. What matters is not the percentage, but the posture of the heart. Another damaging aspect of the way tithing has been taught is the pressure it places on those who are already struggling. Many people have felt compelled to give even when they cannot afford basic necessities, believing that if they sacrifice their last bit of money, God will supernaturally provide for them. While faith is powerful, God never intended for people to give to the point of suffering. The widow who gave her last 2 coins in the Bible was commended not because she followed a rule, but because she gave with a heart full of faith and trust. Her story is about trust, not obligation. There must be a shift in the way people understand tithing. Instead of seeing it as a duty that must be fulfilled to avoid punishment, it should be seen as an opportunity to express gratitude and faith. Giving should not be forced, it should be inspired. People should be free to give as they feel led without fear of condemnation. They should be taught not only about giving, but also about managing their resources wisely so that they can truly live in abundance. The truth is that God is not concerned with numbers. He is concerned with the heart. If someone tithes 10% but does so with resentment, that giving is meaningless. If someone gives 5% but does so with love and joy, that giving is powerful. It is not about legalism, it is about love. When giving is done from a place of revelation and understanding, it becomes a source of blessing rather than a burden. For tithing to fulfill its true purpose, it must be taught correctly. People must be encouraged to give, not because they are afraid, but because they are inspired. They must be empowered with financial wisdom so that their giving does not lead them into hardship. They must understand that God's provision is not dependent on a fixed percentage, but on a life lived in faith, integrity, and generosity. Tithing was never meant to be a burden, and it is time to restore the true meaning behind it. It is time to give with wisdom, with joy, and with an understanding that God's blessings are not bought. They are received through faith and stewardship. Many people have been led to believe that tithing is a requirement for receiving God's blessings. They are taught that unless they give exactly 10% of their income, they are robbing God and blocking their own financial breakthrough. This belief has placed countless individuals under pressure, causing them to give out of fear rather than faith. But the truth is, God's blessings are not for sale. His favor, provision, and abundance are not dependent on a financial transaction. If blessings could be bought, then only the wealthiest people in the world would be truly blessed, while those who struggle financially would always remain cursed. But we know this is not true. God does not operate on a system of financial bribery. He does not withhold his goodness from those who cannot afford to tithe, nor does he pour out unlimited wealth on those who do. Blessings come from a life lived in alignment with his principles: faith, wisdom, stewardship, integrity, and generosity. Many churches have taught that tithing is the key to unlocking supernatural financial breakthroughs, but they often fail to emphasize the other factors that contribute to abundance. Giving alone is not a guarantee of wealth. If someone tithes but mismanages their money, spends recklessly, or lives beyond their means, they will still experience financial struggles. This is why understanding the full picture of financial wisdom is just as important as giving. Some of the most financially prosperous people on earth have never tithed a day in their lives. Yet they understand how to create wealth manage resources, and invest wisely. Their success is not based on whether they gave 10% of their income to a church. It is based on their knowledge, discipline, and ability to seize opportunities. Meanwhile, many sincere believers who tithe faithfully continue to struggle because they have not been taught how to manage their finances effectively. They have been given the impression that as long as they give, God will take care of the rest. But this is not how financial success works. Faith without wisdom is incomplete. God's blessings are not conditional upon a fixed percentage of income. The Bible is filled with stories of people who were blessed not because of their tithing, but because of their faith, obedience, and stewardship. Abraham was blessed long before he ever tithed. Joseph became a ruler in Egypt because of his wisdom and ability to manage resources, not because he gave 10% of his earnings. Solomon became the wealthiest king not because he tithed, but because he asked God for wisdom and applied it in his leadership. These examples show that prosperity is tied more to wisdom and obedience than to a strict financial formula. The idea that God punishes those who do not tithe is a misunderstanding of his nature. He is not a transactional God who demands payment in exchange for blessings. He is a loving father who desires that his children walk in wisdom, faith, and generosity. The true heart of giving is not about fulfilling an obligation. It is about recognizing God as the source of all provision and honoring him with what we have. However, this does not mean that giving should be forced or manipulated. When people give out of fear, they are not walking in faith. They are walking in bondage. True prosperity comes from understanding and applying biblical principles of financial management. Giving is a part of this, but it is not the whole picture. A person who tithes but does not budget, save, or invest will still experience financial difficulties. On the other hand, a person who understands financial principles and practices good stewardship will prosper whether they tithe or not. This is not to say that tithing is wrong, but it must be done with the right understanding. It should never be seen as a way to buy God's favor, but as a way to express gratitude and trust in him. There are many ways to honor God with finances beyond just tithing to a church. Helping the poor, supporting missions, giving to those in need, and investing in projects that make a difference are all acts of generosity that reflect God's heart. Unfortunately, many people have been taught that giving to the church is the only way to be financially faithful, which limits their understanding of true biblical generosity. The focus should not be on where money is given, but on the heart behind the giving. When people give out of love, joy, and a desire to bless others, their giving carries power. Another issue with the way tithing is often taught is the guilt and pressure it places on those who are struggling financially. Many believers have been made to feel that if they cannot afford to tithe, they are disappointing God or setting themselves up for failure. This is not the message of grace and freedom that Jesus preached. Nowhere in the New Testament are believers commanded to give 10% of their income under threat of punishment. Instead, they're encouraged to give generously as they are able and with a willing heart. This means that if someone is unable to give 10%, they should not feel condemned. God sees the heart, not just the amount. There must be a shift in the way people understand financial blessings. Instead of seeing tithing as a magic formula for wealth, believers must be taught the full picture of financial success. This includes hard work, wise investments, saving, giving with wisdom, and making responsible financial decisions. When people understand that blessings are tied to stewardship rather than strict religious rules, they will walk in true financial freedom. God desires that his people live in abundance, but he does not want them to be manipulated into giving. He wants them to give with joy, understanding, and purpose. When giving is done from a place of love and wisdom, it brings true fulfillment and blessing. But when it is done out of obligation, it loses its power. Tithing should be a personal decision based on faith and conviction, not a religious burden. People should be encouraged to give freely without pressure, knowing that their generosity is a reflection of their trust in God, not a payment for his blessings. True financial increase comes from wisdom, stewardship, and integrity, not from a religious transaction. The moment people break free from the mindset that they must buy God's favor, they will step into a greater level of financial peace and prosperity. True giving goes beyond the church. For years, many people have been taught that the only way to honor God with their finances is to give 10% of their income to a religious institution. They have been told that their faithfulness is measured by their tithing and that anything less is disobedience. But what if generosity was never meant to be confined to a single place? What if the real measure of financial faithfulness was not just how much is given to a church, but how much is used to make a difference in the lives of others? The idea that giving should be limited to a church is a narrow view of generosity. God's heart for giving extends far beyond the four walls of a building. The Bible is filled with commands to help the poor, care for widows and orphans, and be a blessing to those in need. Yet, many believers feel trapped in the idea that their giving is only valid if it goes to their local church. This mindset has caused many to overlook opportunities to support struggling families, contribute to community projects, or invest in causes that bring real change. Generosity should never be limited to an institution. It should be a lifestyle. Throughout history, many of the most impactful acts of giving did not happen inside a church. Hospitals, orphanages, schools, and charities have been built by generous people who understood that wealth is a tool to serve others. These acts of generosity have changed lives, provided opportunities, and lifted people out of poverty. Yet many churches rarely emphasize this kind of giving. Instead, they focus on collecting tithes while neglecting to teach people how to use their resources to make a broader impact. True giving is about being led by wisdom and compassion. There are people struggling every day, single mothers trying to make ends meet, families who cannot afford medical care, children who go to bed hungry. These are real needs that God cares about. When someone gives directly to help a person in crisis, they are walking in the true spirit of generosity. But if they have been conditioned to believe that only tithing to a church counts as giving, they may ignore these opportunities, thinking that their financial responsibility has already been fulfilled. Many people have become frustrated with the way giving is presented in churches because they see little evidence of their contributions being used for real impact. Some churches collect millions in tithes, yet do little to support their communities. Meanwhile, hardworking believers struggle financially, being told that their breakthrough will come if they just keep giving more. This imbalance has led many to question whether tithing to a church alone is truly the best way to honor God with their finances. If giving is supposed to be about helping others, then why are so many churches more focused on expanding buildings than meeting the needs of the people inside them. The truth is, God is not concerned about where money is given as much as he is concerned about the heart behind it. He wants people to be generous, but that generosity is not limited to church offerings. A person who gives to a homeless shelter, sponsors a child's education, or helps a friend pay their rent in a time of crisis is just as faithful as someone who tithes regularly. In fact, their giving may be even more meaningful because it is directly impacting someone's life in a tangible way. Jesus himself demonstrated that true giving is about people, not institutions. He fed the hungry, healed the sick, and ministered to the broken. He never demanded tithes from his followers, but he constantly encouraged them to give to those in need. The early church functioned in the same way, sharing their resources so that no one lacked anything. Their generosity was not about funding a religious system. It was about building a community where everyone was cared for. One of the greatest lies that has been told about giving is that if someone does not tithe, they are robbing God. This interpretation of Scripture has been used to pressure people into giving out of fear rather than love. But God is not a tax collector, and he does not need money to accomplish his plans. He owns everything and can provide in ways that go beyond human understanding. What he desires is not forced giving, but joyful and intentional generosity that comes from a heart of compassion. It is time for a shift in the way people view giving. Instead of seeing it as a religious duty that must be fulfilled in a specific way, it should be seen as a powerful tool to transform lives. Giving should be about impact, not obligation. It should be about making a difference, not following a rule. If someone gives generously to causes that uplift others, they are just as faithful as someone who tithes every week. Imagine a world where every believer took responsibility for using their resources wisely. Instead of simply dropping money into a collection plate and hoping for a financial breakthrough, they actively sought ways to improve their communities. They started businesses that provided jobs, built schools that educated children, and funded programs that helped the less fortunate. This is what true biblical giving looks like. Not just supporting a church, but using wealth to create real change. There is nothing wrong with tithing to a church, but it should never be the only form of giving. People should be free to follow their convictions, giving where they see the greatest need. Some may feel led to support missions, while others may be called to help struggling families or invest in charitable organizations. What matters is not the location of the giving, but the heart behind it. When generosity is no longer confined to the church, people begin to see money as a tool for good rather than a religious obligation. They begin to experience the joy of giving freely without pressure or guilt. They realize that every act of kindness, every dollar given to help someone in need, is just as valuable as a tithe. They step into a deeper understanding of what it truly means to be a steward of God's blessings. At the end of the day, giving is not about meeting a quota. It is about making an impact. It is about recognizing that true generosity is measured not by how much is given to a church, but by how much is used to change lives. The moment people break free from the mindset that giving is limited to religious institutions, they will discover a new level of freedom, fulfillment, and purpose in their financial journey. Financial wisdom is just as important as giving. For too long, many believers have been taught that tithing alone is the key to financial breakthrough. But this is an incomplete message. While giving is a biblical principle, it is not a replacement for wisdom, discipline, and financial stewardship. Many faithful tithers still struggle financially, not because God has failed them, but because they have not been equipped with the knowledge to manage their resources effectively. The truth is, no amount of giving can make up for poor financial decisions. Without understanding how to budget, save, invest, and create wealth, a person can tithe faithfully for years and still remain in financial bondage. God's blessings are not just about receiving money. They are about receiving wisdom to handle money. The Bible speaks often about wisdom and understanding, showing that prosperity is tied to knowledge, not just generosity. In Proverbs, wisdom is described as being more valuable than silver and gold. This is because financial success is not about how much money comes in, but about how well it is managed. There are people who earn millions yet remain in debt, while others with modest incomes live in abundance because they apply financial wisdom. One of the biggest financial traps people fall into is the belief that giving alone will solve their money problems. Many churches emphasize sowing seeds and tithing as a way to escape financial difficulties, but they do not teach people how to budget or make wise financial decisions. And as a result, many sincere believers give beyond their means, expecting supernatural provision, only to find themselves deeper in financial stress. God honors faith, but he also honors wisdom. He expects his people to be good stewards of what they have before he can trust them with more. Jesus spoke frequently about stewardship. In the parable of the talents, he made it clear that those who manage their resources wisely will be entrusted with more, while those who are careless will lose what they have. This principle applies to finances as well. It is not enough to give generously. One must also manage money wisely. If someone tithes faithfully but does not budget, avoids saving, and lives beyond their means, they will still face financial hardship. On the other hand, a person who is disciplined with money, avoids debt, and invests wisely will build lasting wealth. Many churches encourage giving but fail to teach financial literacy. As a result, believers give generously but struggle financially because they lack the knowledge to create and sustain wealth. They are taught to trust God for provision, but not how to handle the provision when it comes. This is why many tithers remain in cycles of lack while others who apply financial principles succeed. It is not because God favors one person over another, but because wisdom and stewardship play a crucial role in financial success. Understanding how money works is just as spiritual as giving. Financial literacy is not separate from faith. It is part of being a good steward. The Bible warns against debt, encourages hard work, and promotes saving and investing. These are all principles that lead to financial success. Yet many believers neglect these principles, thinking that tithing alone is enough. They continue to struggle, waiting for a financial breakthrough, when what they need is a breakthrough in their mindset. Some of the wealthiest people in the world have never tithed a day in their lives, yet they understand financial principles that allow them to build and sustain wealth. Meanwhile, many tithing believers live paycheck to paycheck, not because they lack faith, but because they lack financial wisdom. This does not mean that tithing is wrong. It means that it must be combined with sound financial principles. Faith and wisdom must work together. Tithing is often taught as a shortcut to financial success, but there are no shortcuts. Financial prosperity requires discipline, planning, and wise decision making. A person who faithfully tithes but spends recklessly will still end up in financial ruin. A person who does not tithe but applies financial wisdom can still build wealth. The ideal approach is to do both, to give generously and manage money wisely. God wants his people to prosper, but he also wants them to be responsible. He does not bless wastefulness or poor financial choices. Many people tithe faithfully while continuing to make financial mistakes, such as taking on unnecessary debt, living beyond their means, or failing to plan for the future. They believe that giving alone will fix their financial situation, but they do not take the necessary steps to be good stewards. Prosperity is not just about receiving, it is about managing well what has already been given. Another dangerous mindset is the belief that God will supernaturally cancel financial problems without any effort on the part of the believer. While God is able to perform miracles, he expects his people to use wisdom. A person who ignores financial principles and continues to make poor choices cannot expect God to override their irresponsibility. He provides opportunities, wisdom, and resources, but it is up to individuals to manage them correctly. Financial wisdom includes learning how to budget, saving for the future, investing in assets that grow, and avoiding unnecessary debt. These principles apply to everyone, regardless of how much they earn. A person who makes a small income but manages it well will be in a better financial position than someone who earns a high income but spends recklessly. Wealth is not about how much is made, it is about how much is kept and multiplied. The church should teach financial stewardship alongside generosity. People need to understand that while giving is important, it is not a replacement for wise financial management. They should be encouraged to not only be generous, but also to build financial stability, create multiple streams of income, and plan for the future. When believers are financially strong, they are in a better position to give and make a lasting impact. Many financial struggles are not due to a lack of faith, but a lack of knowledge. The Bible says that people perish for lack of knowledge, and this applies to finances as well. Giving should never be used as an excuse for poor money management. Instead, believers should strive to be both generous and financially wise. When faith and wisdom work together, true financial freedom is achieved. God's blessings are not based on tithing alone. They are based on stewardship, discipline, and wisdom. When people combine generosity with sound financial principles, they break free from financial struggles and walk in true abundance. Many churches place a heavy emphasis on tithing, but often fail to be transparent about how those funds are used. Week after week, members are encouraged, sometimes even pressured, to give a portion of their income, with the promise that their obedience will unlock financial blessings. However, the reality is that many churchgoers have no idea where their money is actually going. While they faithfully contribute, they struggle financially, while some church leaders live in extreme wealth, raising serious questions about accountability and stewardship. The concept of tithing was originally meant to support the community, care for the poor, and ensure that those in ministry could continue their work. But in many modern churches, tithes are primarily used to fund large buildings, expensive lifestyles, and projects that serve the interests of leadership rather than the needs of the congregation. When people give, they assume their money is being used wisely, but many churches do not provide clear financial reports or explanations about how those funds are allocated. This lack of transparency creates an environment where financial mismanagement can thrive. Many believers struggle financially, yet they continue to give, believing that their faithfulness will eventually bring a breakthrough. Meanwhile, some church leaders accumulate wealth, living in luxury, driving expensive cars, and owning multiple properties, all funded by the generosity of their members. This is not to say that pastors should live in poverty, but there must be a balance. The purpose of tithing should not be to elevate a few individuals while the majority of the congregation remains in financial struggle. If the church is collecting millions in tithes, then there should be clear evidence of how that money is being used to uplift the people who gave it. One of the biggest problems with the way tithing is taught is that it is often presented as an obligation rather than an act of genuine generosity. People are made to feel guilty if they do not give, and some are even told that they are robbing God if they fail to tithe. This fear-based approach leads many to give, not out of love or a desire to help others, but out of fear that they will be cursed or miss out on blessings. But God does not operate on a transactional system where blessings are bought with money. True giving comes from the heart, and it should be done freely, not under compulsion. Despite the significant amounts of money collected through tithes, many churches do little to provide real financial education or assistance to their members. Instead of teaching people how to manage money, budget, and invest, they simply encourage them to give more, reinforcing the idea that financial success comes solely from tithing. But financial wisdom is just as important as generosity. People need to learn how to create wealth, manage debt, and build financial security rather than just being told to keep giving while they struggle. A financially responsible church should prioritize transparency, ensuring that members know exactly how their contributions are being used. This means providing detailed reports, making financial decisions public, and being accountable for every dollar received. Unfortunately, many churches operate in secrecy when it comes to finances, avoiding questions about budgets and expenditures. This lack of openness leads to mistrust and, in some cases, financial corruption. Some church leaders justify extravagant spending by claiming that their wealth is a sign of God's blessing. They point to their luxury homes, private jets, and designer clothes as proof that God has favored them. But this raises an important question. If tithing is supposed to bless the giver, then why are so many faithful tithers still struggling while a select few accumulate vast wealth? The purpose of church finances should not be to enrich a handful of individuals, but to uplift the entire body of believers. When Jesus walked the earth, he did not live in luxury. He did not demand money from his followers or use their contributions to elevate his personal lifestyle. Instead, he cared for the poor, fed the hungry, and healed the sick. The early church followed this model, sharing their resources so that no one lacked anything. Today, however, many churches operate more like businesses, focusing on expansion, branding, and personal wealth rather than serving their communities. Giving is a powerful and biblical principle, but it must be done with understanding. People should not feel pressured to give under manipulation, nor should they be blind to how their contributions are used. A truly transparent church will not shy away from questions about finances. It will ensure that tithes are used to benefit the congregation, support the needy, and create real change in the community. Many believers are beginning to question the way tithing is handled in their churches. They are no longer willing to give blindly without accountability. They want to know that their generosity is making a real impact, not just funding unnecessary expenses. The church should welcome these questions rather than dismissing them as a lack of faith. True leadership requires accountability, and those who handle church finances should be willing to be fully transparent about their decisions. There must be a shift in how churches handle finances. Instead of using tithing as a tool for guilt or control, it should be taught as a principle of generosity and stewardship. Instead of focusing on collecting more, churches should focus on using what they already have wisely. Instead of enriching a few, church finances should be used to empower the entire congregation, ensuring that those who give also receive the support and education they need to thrive. Ultimately, God cares about the heart behind giving, not just the amount given. He desires that people give freely, with joy, and with an understanding of how their generosity is being used. When churches embrace transparency and accountability, they build trust with their members, strengthen their communities, and reflect the true spirit of biblical giving. Until this happens, many will continue to question whether their tithes are truly making a difference or simply funding a system that does not serve them in return. The truth about tithing is far deeper than what many churches teach. While giving is a biblical principle, it was never meant to be a rigid obligation, a financial transaction with God, or a tool for manipulation. True generosity is not confined to a single institution, but is meant to uplift people, support communities, and create real change. For too long, many believers have been led to believe that financial blessings come solely from tithing, while neglecting wisdom, stewardship, and responsibility. Many have given faithfully yet continue to struggle, not because God has failed them, but because they were not taught how to manage, multiply, and sustain their resources. Meanwhile, some church leaders accumulate immense wealth with little transparency about how tithes are used, creating an imbalance that raises serious concerns. God does not bless blind giving, He blesses wise stewardship. He does not measure faithfulness by how much is given to a church, but by how much a person uses their resources to make a difference. True prosperity comes when generosity is combined with financial wisdom, responsible management, and a heart that seeks to help others rather than simply fulfilling an obligation. It is time for a shift in the way giving is understood. Instead of feeling pressured to tithe out of fear, believers should embrace giving as a joyful, purposeful act. Instead of relying on tithing alone for financial success, they should seek knowledge, develop financial discipline, and build wealth in a way that honors God. And most importantly, churches must embrace transparency, ensuring that tithes are used not for personal gain, but for the true mission of uplifting people and advancing God's kingdom. True giving is not about meeting a quota. It is about making an impact. It is about breaking free from religious guilt and stepping into financial freedom, where generosity is not a burden but a blessing. When believers understand this, they will no longer be manipulated by half-truths, but will walk in the fullness of what it truly means to be a wise and generous steward of God's blessings. Ladies and gentlemen, tithing has been preached for generations as a key to financial breakthrough, divine favor, and abundant blessings. Many have been taught that giving 10% of their income guarantees them wealth, security, and supernatural provision. But what if I told you there's a deeper truth that your church never tells you? A truth that can set you free from financial manipulation and help you understand the real power of giving. Tithing was never meant to be a religious burden, but a principle of honor, stewardship, and faith. The problem is that many have turned